Have you ever wondered what a person is worth? Not their net worth, the number that flashes on a stock ticker or a bank statement, but their real worth. The value of their character, their heart, their hidden strength. We make snap judgments every day. The person who bags our groceries, the cleaner who mops the floors, the server who brings our coffee. We see the uniform, not the soul inside it. We see their function, not their potential. But what if the person you dismiss today holds the key to your entire future tomorrow? What if the quiet one you overlooked was the only one who could grant you the thing you wanted most in the world? This is a story about what happens when two worlds collide, not by chance, but by a destiny designed to teach one powerful woman a lesson she would never forget. It's a story about a dismissive glance, a rolled eye, and a moment of arrogance that nearly cost an empire its soul, and how it was saved by the quiet dignity of a woman who was taught that her worth was never defined by the apron she wore. It began, as so many moments of reckoning do, in a place of immense power and profound blindness. Eleanor Vance sat in her corner office, a glass cage suspended 40 floors above the sprawling city. The skyline was a testament to ambition, a collection of steel and glass monuments to conquest, and she considered it her kingdom. Her desk was a vast expanse of polished obsidian, reflecting her own severe, impeccable image, a woman forged in the fires of corporate warfare, with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. But today, a crack had appeared in her composure. Her fingers, usually steady as they signed multi-million-dollar contracts, tapped an impatient rhythm against a single, deceptively simple folder. Inside was the final obstacle to her latest and greatest acquisition, a company called Abuela's Kitchen. It was a small, family-owned producer of artisanal foods, whose recent product line had exploded in popularity, catching the eye of her massive conglomerate, Vance Global. The numbers were staggering. The growth potential was off the charts. Every analyst, every consultant, every member of her board agreed it was a golden goose. Yet the deal was stalled. It was stalled by one person, the company's founder, an elderly matriarch named Isabella Rojas, who had built the business from a single street cart into a regional phenomenon. The contracts were ready, the price was more than generous, but Isabella had insisted on a final, personal meeting. She wouldn't sign until she could look the new owner in the eye, her lawyer had explained, and feel the heart of the person who will be the custodian of my family's legacy. Eleanor had scoffed at the very notion. Heart. Legacy. These were quaint, sentimental words that had no place on a balance sheet. They were inefficiencies, emotional baggage to be stripped away in the name of shareholder value. Her partner, Marcus Thorne, a man whose cynicism made Eleanor's pragmatism look like wide-eyed optimism, buzzed on the intercom. "Any word from the old woman's keepers?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "They're confirming the meeting for tomorrow morning," Eleanor replied, her voice tight. "She still insists on this face-to-face charade. She wants to assess my character, Marcus." He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Character? Tell her your character is a 7% year-over-year growth projection. That's all the character that matters. Just smile, tell her you love her grandmother's secret recipe, and get her signature on the damn paper. Once we own it, we can replace her legacy with a state-of-the-art automated processing facility and triple our margins." Eleanor felt a familiar, sour knot tighten in her stomach. Marcus's brutal honesty was what made him an effective partner, but lately it had begun to grate on her. Still, he was right. This was a game, and she was a master of it. "I'm meeting you at that diner near their headquarters in an hour to go over the final pitch," she said, already closing the folder. "Let's make sure our stories align. The greasy spoon on Elm Street." Marcus groaned. "Can't we meet at the Vanguard?" "No," Eleanor snapped. "I want to be close to the target. I want to understand the environment. See you there." She hung up, the silence of her office pressing in on her. She stared out at the city, at the thousands of windows in the buildings opposite hers. Behind each one was a person, a life, a story. But to her, they were just data points, consumers, employees, obstacles. And tomorrow, she would face an obstacle that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. An old woman who wanted to see her soul. Eleanor felt a surge of irritation. She would give her a performance, a perfectly calibrated display of respect and admiration. She would win. She always did. She had no idea that her most important test had already begun, and she was about to fail it spectacularly. The diner was called the Corner Booth. It was exactly the kind of place Eleanor despised. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions and old coffee. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked, and the tabletop had a slight, sticky residue that made her skin crawl. It was a relic, a holdout from a bygone era she was actively working to render obsolete. Marcus was already there, nursing a black coffee, his expensive suit looking comically out of place against the faded checkered wallpaper. He smirked as she slid into the booth, her expression a mask of distaste. "Charming, isn't it?" he said. "I think I saw a rat in the kitchen that looked more ambitious than the cook." Eleanor ignored him, her eyes scanning the room. It was filled with ordinary people, people who worked with their hands, their faces etched with the quiet fatigue of a long day. She felt a profound sense of disconnect, as if she were an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. A young woman approached their table. She wore a simple, clean but faded blue uniform with a white apron. Her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and though there were faint smudges of exhaustion under her eyes, her expression was calm and professional. "Hi, welcome to the Corner Booth. Can I get you started with something to drink?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. This was Maya. Eleanor didn't even look up from the folder she'd placed on the table. "Just water. Bottled. Not tap," she said, her tone clipped and dismissive. "And be quick about it." Marcus ordered a coffee. The waitress, Maya, simply nodded. "Of course. I'll be right back with those." As she turned to leave, her arm brushed against a tall glass of water left from the previous customer, and a small amount sloshed onto the edge of Eleanor's file. It was a tiny accident, a few drops of water on a laminated cover. But to Eleanor, in her heightened state of stress and irritation, it was an unforgivable intrusion. She gasped, snatching the folder away as if it had been doused in acid. "Watch what you're doing," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to make a man at the next table look over. "This is important. Can you not even walk without causing a problem?" Maya's face flushed with color. She grabbed a cloth from her apron, her hands moving quickly. "I am so sorry, ma'am. It was an accident." "Let me clean that for you, don't touch it," Eleanor hissed, wiping the few drops away with her own silk handkerchief. She looked up at Maya for the first time, her eyes cold and appraising. She saw nothing of note. Just a tired-looking girl in a cheap uniform, an anonymous face in a forgettable establishment. A nobody. Eleanor gave a theatrical, long-suffering sigh and rolled her eyes at Marcus, a clear, deliberate gesture that said, "See what I have to deal with." The gesture was meant for him, but Maya saw it. It was a small act of cruelty, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, Maya was not a person to Eleanor. She was an inconvenience, a clumsy functionary, a thing to be dismissed. Maya stood frozen for a second, the apology dying on her lips. She saw the contempt in the woman's eyes, the casual cruelty of the gesture. She felt a familiar, hot sting of humiliation, a feeling she had known many times in her life. But years of practice had taught her to build a wall around her heart. She took a quiet breath, straightened her shoulders, and her expression became a perfect, impenetrable mask of professional courtesy. "I will get your bottled water right away," she said, her voice perfectly even. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her dignity a shield Eleanor couldn't see and wouldn't have understood. Eleanor had already forgotten her. She opened her folder and began talking strategy with Marcus, her voice a low, confident hum. She had faced the first test of her day and, in her own mind, had efficiently handled a minor annoyance. She had no way of knowing she had just looked into the eyes of the one person who held the fate of Abuela's kitchen in her hands, and had shown her nothing but disdain. The scales of justice, unseen by the powerful woman in the booth, had just tipped dramatically. Maya's shift ended an hour after the woman with the cruel eyes and her smirking partner had left. They hadn't tipped, of course. She hadn't expected them to. As she wiped down their sticky table, she allowed herself a small, weary sigh. The woman's eye roll played over in her mind. It wasn't the first time she had been treated as invisible, as less than, but for some reason, this one had cut deeper. Perhaps it was the sheer, unadulterated arrogance, the casual way she had been dismissed as a clumsy object. Maya pushed the feeling down. There was no time for self-pity. There was too much work to do. She hung up her apron, the symbol of her day job, and walked out of the diner's back door into the cool evening air. Her steps, which had been heavy with fatigue inside the diner, now found a new energy. She wasn't heading home to a tiny apartment to collapse in front of a television. She was heading to her real life. Her walk took her 3 blocks away, to a modest, unassuming brick building tucked between a laundromat and a small bookstore. The sign above the door was hand-painted, warm and inviting. Abuela's Kitchen. This was not just a brand name on a folder in a corporate office. It was a real place. It was her home. The moment she stepped inside, the sense of cinnamon, slow-roasted chilies, and fresh cilantro enveloped her, a warm, comforting embrace that chased away the sterile smell of the diner's cleaning fluid. This was the smell of her childhood, the smell of her legacy. In the heart of the building was a large, bustling kitchen, a stark contrast to the quiet diner. Here, under the warm glow of industrial lights, a small team of workers chopped vegetables, stirred enormous pots, and carefully packed jars with the vibrant sauces and salsas that were making their name. And at the center of it all, sitting in her wheelchair beside a large wooden tasting table, was Isabella Rojas. Her hair was a crown of silver, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, but her eyes were as sharp and clear as a hawk's. She looked up as Maya entered, and her stern expression melted into a smile of pure, unadulterated love. "Mija," she said, her voice rich with affection. "How was your day?" Maya kissed her grandmother's forehead. "It was a day, Abuela." She didn't elaborate. She never brought the troubles of the diner into this sacred space. This was her sanctuary. "Did you finish the tasting notes for the new mole?" Isabella asked, gesturing to a row of small, numbered bowls on the table. "Almost," Maya said, her focus shifting instantly. She picked up a spoon, her entire demeanor changing. The tired waitress vanished, replaced by a focused, passionate artisan. She dipped the spoon into a bowl of deep, dark sauce, closed her eyes, and let it rest on her tongue. Her expression was one of intense concentration, like a composer listening to a symphony. "A little more toasted sesame," she murmured. "And the ancho chili needs to be bloomed for another 10 minutes. It's not releasing its smoky notes." Isabella nodded, her eyes twinkling with pride. "You have the gift, Maya. Your palate is better than mine ever was." This was their secret, the truth hidden from the world of corporate acquisitions and due diligence. While Isabella Rojas was the beloved founder and the face of the company, Maya was its heart and its future. She was the one who had spent years studying old family recipes, experimenting, innovating. She was the one who developed the new product line that had captured the attention of Vance Global. She was the artist, the genius behind the brand. But she was content to remain in the shadows, letting her grandmother enjoy the credit. The weight of it all was immense. Abuela's Kitchen was more than a business. It was the livelihood of the 20 people who worked there, people who were like family. But rising costs and aggressive competition were squeezing them. They were struggling to keep up with demand, and a recent equipment failure had put them deep in the red. The offer from Vance Global was a lifeline, a chance to not only survive but to thrive, to bring their food to the world. But the fear that came with it was just as great. Isabella voiced it as she watched Maya adjust the recipe. "This woman, this Eleanor Vance," she said softly. "Her company is a giant. They swallow little fish like us. They say they will honor our legacy, but words are cheap. What if they turn our kitchen into a factory? What if they replace our people with machines and our ingredients with chemicals? Maya stopped stirring. She looked at her grandmother, saw the deep worry in her eyes, and her heart ached. That's why you are meeting her, Abuela. You will look into her eyes, and you will know. You have always been able to read a person's soul. Isabella reached out and took her granddaughter's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But it is your soul in these recipes, Mija. It is your future. The final decision must be yours. You will be there with me tomorrow. You will listen. And you will tell me what you see. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Tomorrow, she would come face to face with the woman from the diner again. The woman who had rolled her eyes, who had looked at her and seen nothing of value. And in that moment, she would have to decide if this woman was worthy of holding her family's dream in her hands. The irony was so thick, so bitter, she could almost taste it. She looked at her own hands, stained with spices and chapped from dishwater. To Eleanor Vance, they were the hands of a clumsy servant. But here, in this kitchen, they were the hands of a creator, the hands that held the power. And tomorrow, she would have to decide how to use it. Eleanor spent the night in her sterile, silent hotel suite, preparing for battle. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She paced the floor, her mind a whirlwind of numbers, projections, and strategic talking points. She had her pitch memorized, a carefully constructed narrative designed to appeal to the sentimentalities of an old woman. She would speak of family, of tradition, of honoring the past while building the future. The words felt like ash in her mouth, a hollow performance she had perfected over years of similar conquests. She looked over the file on Abuela's kitchen again, her eyes drawn to the sales charts. The growth was explosive, driven almost entirely by a new line of products introduced 18 months ago, a chipotle lime crema, a mango habanero salsa, and a complex Oaxacan-style mole. They were brilliant, innovative, and completely authentic. Whoever created them was a genius. The company's own marketing materials attributed them to Isabella Rojas, a culmination of a lifetime of culinary wisdom. Eleanor accepted this at face value. It fit the narrative. She practiced her smile in the mirror. It was warm, reassuring, and utterly fake. She chose her outfit with surgical precision, a conservative but expensive navy blue suit, designed to convey power without being intimidating. She was crafting a character, an actress preparing for a role. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Ready for the big show?" he asked. "Don't forget to shed a single, perfect tear when she talks about her dear departed husband or whatever. I've got it handled, Marcus," she said, her patience wearing thin. "This isn't my first time charming a founder, just remember the stakes, Elle," he warned. "The board is watching this one. They want a clean, quick close. Don't let some old woman's sob story get in the way of a 9-figure valuation." The call ended, leaving Eleanor alone with her reflection. She saw a powerful, successful woman staring back at her. But for a fleeting moment, she also saw the cracks in the facade. The deep-set lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. She was so tired of the game, of the constant pressure to be harder, colder, more ruthless than the competition. She pushed the thought away. Weakness was a liability. The next morning, she arrived at the address she'd been given. It wasn't the gleaming corporate park she'd expected. It was the modest brick building she had passed the day before without a second glance. The headquarters of Abuela's kitchen. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into another world. The air wasn't filtered and temperature controlled. It was warm and fragrant with the scent of cooking. The reception area wasn't manned by a corporate drone behind a sleek desk, but by a smiling older woman who offered her a cup of spiced coffee while she waited. The walls were covered not with abstract corporate art, but with framed photos of a smiling family, of a young Isabella at a street cart, of children covered in flour. It was a history, a life, not a brand identity. It was disarming. Eleanor felt her carefully constructed armor begin to buckle. This place felt real, authentic. It felt happy. Her discomfort grew. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, his usual smirk firmly in place. "Cozy," he muttered, looking around with disdain. Let's hope the plumbing is up to code. A man in a simple suit, presumably the company's lawyer, greeted them and led them not to a boardroom, but to a large room that looked more like a family dining room. A long, polished oak table stood in the center, surrounded by mismatched but comfortable-looking chairs. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The formality she was used to was entirely absent, and it threw her off balance. She was used to controlling the environment, to meeting on her turf, where she could dominate the proceedings. Here, she was a guest in someone's home. She felt a prickle of anxiety, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She was a shark, and she was being asked to negotiate in a sunlit meadow. She clutched her briefcase like a shield, her knuckles white. Marcus, oblivious, checked his watch. All right, let's get this over with. Bring on the grandma. The door at the far end of the room opened, and Eleanor straightened her jacket, her performance-ready smile clicking into place. This was it. The final act. An elderly woman, Isabella Rojas, was gracefully guided into the room in a wheelchair. She was exactly as Eleanor had pictured her, elegant, dignified, with kind eyes that held a hint of steel. But it wasn't Isabella that made the blood drain from Eleanor's face. It was the person behind the wheelchair. It was the young woman pushing it. She was no longer in a faded waitress uniform. She was wearing a simple, professional black dress, her hair pulled back just as it had been the day before. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. It was Maya, the waitress. The clumsy, invisible girl from the diner. Eleanor's mind short-circuited. 1,000 frantic thoughts crashed into each other. It can't be. It's a coincidence. She just works here. A helper. An assistant. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and dawning horror. She could feel the color draining from her face, her carefully practiced smile frozen in a grotesque parody of warmth. Marcus, beside her, hadn't made the connection. He saw a young woman and an old one, the hierarchy obvious to his prejudiced eyes. He gave Maya a cursory, dismissive nod before focusing his attention on Isabella, the person he perceived as the sole decision-maker. But then Isabella spoke, her voice gentle but firm, and the floor fell out from beneath Eleanor's world. Miss Vance, Mr. Thorne, she began, her gaze sweeping over them. Thank you for coming. I would like to introduce you to my granddaughter, Maya Rojas. Isabella paused, letting the name settle in the air. She then placed her frail hand on Maya's. And more than that, I want you to know that Maya is the creative force behind this company. She is the heart and the future of Abuela's Kitchen. While I may be the founder, she is the final voice on this decision. The approval you seek is not mine to give. It is hers. The room was silent, but for Eleanor, it was filled with a deafening roar. Her memory flashed, vivid and cruel, to the scene in the diner. The impatient snap of her fingers. The sharp, condescending tone of her voice. Watch what you're doing. And then, the final, devastating blow, the slow, deliberate roll of her eyes. A gesture of pure contempt. She had done that to the woman who held her entire 9-figure deal in the palm of her hand. Maya's eyes met hers across the table. There was no anger in them. No triumph. Just a quiet, unwavering calm that was somehow more terrifying than any accusation. In that moment, Eleanor Vance, the titan of industry, the master negotiator, understood the true meaning of powerlessness. She wasn't here to acquire a company. She was here to be judged. The presentation began, but it was a disaster. The words that had sounded so confident and persuasive in her hotel suite now felt hollow and false. Eleanor's voice was strained, her hands trembled slightly as she clicked through the slides on her laptop. Every statistic, every growth chart, every polished corporate promise was rendered meaningless by the silent, judging gaze of the young woman across the table. She talked about synergy and shareholder value, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at the photos on the wall, at Isabella's kind but watchful face, and at Maya, whose expression remained a perfect, unreadable mask. She felt like a fraud, a soulless machine trying to explain art to a family of artists. Marcus, sensing her faltering, tried to take over. He launched into his usual aggressive pitch, speaking of market penetration and cost-cutting efficiencies. He spoke of turning Abuela's Kitchen into a global brand, a household name. He painted a picture of a future that was bigger, richer, and shinier, but in the warm, sunlit room, his words sounded cold and predatory. He was talking about gutting the company's soul and calling it progress. When they finally finished, an uncomfortable silence descended. Isabella was the first to speak. She looked at Eleanor, her head tilted slightly. "You speak of a big future, Miss Vance," she said softly. "But my legacy is not about size. It is about connection. Every jar we sell is a connection to our family, to our traditions. How do you preserve a connection when you are building an empire?" Before Eleanor could formulate a carefully worded, dishonest reply, Maya spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room like a knife. She wasn't looking at the presentation or the financial projections. She was looking directly into Eleanor's eyes. "Tell me, Miss Vance," she began, her tone perfectly even. "I have a question for you." "It's not on your slides." Eleanor braced herself. She expected a question about ingredient sourcing, or employee retention, or profit sharing. She was prepared for that. She was not prepared for what came next. What is the value of a person who serves you your coffee? The question hung in the air, a perfectly aimed arrow that pierced through every layer of Eleanor's corporate armor and struck her right in the heart. It wasn't just a question. It was an echo. It was the diner. It was the spilled water. It was the eye roll. It was a mirror held up to her own ugliness. The blood rushed to her ears. The room seemed to tilt. Marcus let out a short, confused laugh. "What kind of a question is that? The value is their hourly wage, I suppose? It's an irrelevant point. We're here to talk about a 9-figure deal, please," Maya said, her gaze never leaving Eleanor's. She held up a hand to silence Marcus, a gesture of quiet authority that he, for once, obeyed. "I'm not asking him. I'm asking you, Miss Vance." Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her mind raced, desperately searching for the right answer. The corporate answer. The strategic answer. She could talk about human resources, about the dignity of labor, about customer service. She could spin a beautiful, meaningless web of words. But she looked into Maya's clear, steady eyes and knew that a lie would not work. A performance would not save her. The girl from the diner had seen her true self, and now she was demanding an accounting. All the pressure of the deal, the sleepless nights, the relentless need to win, coalesced into a single point of unbearable weight. The mask shattered. The carefully constructed persona of Eleanor Vance, ruthless CEO, crumbled into dust. She slumped slightly in her chair, the fight going out of her. I don't have a good answer for that," she stammered, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on her tongue. Her voice was no longer the confident weapon of a boardroom warrior. It was the wavering, uncertain voice of a person utterly lost. "The truth is, I didn't see her," she whispered, the confession torn from a place deep inside her. "Yesterday, at the diner, I didn't see a person. I saw an obstacle. An inconvenience. A function." She finally looked away from Maya, her gaze falling to her own hands, which were clenched tightly on the table. "My world is made of numbers and deadlines and pressures. I've spent so long looking at spreadsheets that I think I've forgotten how to look at people. I measure value in dollars and cents, in market share and profit margins. And when I see someone who doesn't fit into that equation, I dismiss them." The confession hung in the silence, raw and honest. It was the truest thing she had said in years. Marcus stared at her, his jaw slack with disbelief. This was not part of the plan. This was a complete and total breakdown. He tried to interrupt, to salvage the situation. "Eleanor, what are you doing? This is unprofessional. Let's get back to the terms of the offer." But Maya silenced him again, this time with a single, sharp look. Her attention was entirely on Eleanor. She had asked for the truth, and against all odds, she was getting it. Eleanor took a ragged breath and looked back up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "My behavior yesterday was inexcusable," she said, her voice gaining a small measure of strength. "It wasn't just about being stressed or in a hurry. It was a failure of character. It revealed a sickness in my philosophy. If you can't see the value in one person, how can you be trusted with the legacy of a company that is built on people? You shouldn't trust me. I wouldn't trust me." She had just talked herself out of the biggest deal of her career. She had admitted her own unworthiness. And in the wreckage of her ambition, she felt a strange, terrifying sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't performing. She was just her. Broken, flawed, but honest. The silence that followed was profound. Isabella watched her granddaughter, her expression full of love and trust. The decision was Maya's, and she would not interfere. Maya's face, which had been an unreadable mask, softened. A flicker of something, not pity, but perhaps understanding, entered her eyes. The test was over. The judgment was at hand. Maya leaned forward, her hands resting on the warm oak of the table. The room was so quiet that Eleanor could hear the gentle hum of the refrigerators from the kitchen down the hall. "The secret ingredient in my grandmother's cooking," Maya said, her voice soft but resonant, "was never a secret. It wasn't a rare spice or a special technique. It was respect. She taught me that the food you make is a reflection of the love you have for the people you are feeding. It doesn't matter if you are feeding your family or a stranger. Everyone deserves a seat at the table. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." She paused, letting the words sink in. "That is the legacy you want to buy, Miss Vance. It's not in the recipes or the brand. It's in that belief. A belief that you admitted you have lost." Marcus scoffed, unable to contain himself any longer. "Oh, for heaven's sake! This is a business negotiation, not a philosophy seminar. We are offering you and your family generational wealth. Take the deal and your legacy of respect. It's a win-win." Maya turned her gaze to him, and for the first time, her eyes were cold. "The money has never been the most important thing, Mr. Thorne. You, I think, will never understand that." She turned back to Eleanor. "We do need a partner. We are struggling, and we want to grow. But we will not sacrifice our soul to do it. The deal you offered is generous with money, but it is careless with people." Then, she did something extraordinary. Instead of rejecting the offer outright, she began to craft a new one. "So, here are our terms," she said, her voice now filled with the quiet confidence of a leader. "The valuation you offered is fair. We accept it. But the money is the easy part." She began to lay out her conditions. A legally binding charter to protect every single current employee's job for a minimum of 10 years. A significant, non-negotiable annual investment into a community fund for the neighborhood. A program to source a percentage of ingredients from local, family-owned farms. And finally, she looked directly at Eleanor. "And you, Miss Vance. Your role will not just be from a corner office 40 floors away. You will spend 1 week every quarter working here. Not as a CEO, but as an apprentice. In the kitchen, on the packing line, making deliveries. You will learn the names of our people. You will learn the value of their work not from a report, but with your own hands. You will be the custodian of our legacy, and to do that, you must become a part of it." Marcus exploded. "That's insane. It's preposterous. Eleanor is one of the most important executives in the country. She doesn't have time to pack boxes. We reject your ridiculous counteroffer." He stood up, ready to storm out. But Eleanor didn't move. She was staring at Maya, a look of profound astonishment on her face. She wasn't being punished. She was being given a chance. A chance to reconnect, to learn, to heal the part of herself she had admitted was broken. It was a lifeline, disguised as a list of demands. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He stared at her, aghast. "Eleanor, Have you lost your mind? I said, sit down. She repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. He slowly, reluctantly, sank back into his chair. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. She looked from Maya to Isabella and back again. A genuine smile, the first one she had felt in years, touched her lips. It wasn't the practiced, sharp smile of a predator, but something softer, more authentic. I accept, she said, her voice clear and strong. I accept every single term. Without negotiation, Marcus looked like he was going to have a stroke. But Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't felt since she was a young woman just starting her career, full of dreams that had nothing to do with money. She was not just acquiring a company. She was investing in a philosophy. She was buying back a piece of her own soul. The deal was done. Months later, the spirit of Abuela's kitchen was not only alive, it was thriving, amplified by the resources of Vance Global but guided by the unwavering heart of its creators. Marcus Thorne was gone, having resigned in disgust at what he called Eleanor's sentimental capitulation. He was replaced by people who understood the new company philosophy. The headquarters hadn't moved to a gleaming tower. Instead, Vance Global had invested in expanding the humble brick building, adding a new, state-of-the-art kitchen wing and a community garden. And true to her word, Eleanor was there. Today was the last day of her first quarterly apprenticeship. She was standing in the kitchen, wearing a simple white apron, the same kind Maya wore at the diner, over an old t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was tied back, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was carefully folding the corners of empanada dough, her movements still a bit clumsy but full of intense concentration. Maya stood beside her, guiding her hands. A little more gentle, Maya said with a soft smile. You have to persuade the dough, not command it. Eleanor laughed, a real, unforced sound. It's a harder negotiation than any boardroom I've ever been in. She looked around the warm, bustling kitchen, at the faces of the employees she now knew by name. She knew about Maria's daughter who was graduating, about Carlos's father who was recovering from surgery, about the dreams and worries that made them who they were. They were not assets on a balance sheet. They were people. They were family. Later, as the day wound down, Eleanor and Maya sat together at a small table in the corner, sharing a coffee. It was a simple moment, but for Eleanor, it was profound. She was no longer the powerful executive looking down on a lowly waitress. They were partners. They were, to her own surprise, becoming friends. I never thanked you, Eleanor said, looking into her cup. For what? Maya asked. For not just showing me the door that day, Eleanor replied. You could have. Everyone would have understood. Instead, you gave me a much harder and better path. Maya stirred her own coffee, a thoughtful expression on her face. My abuela taught me that you don't throw out a dish just because it has one bitter ingredient. You work with it. You add sweetness, you add warmth, you balance it. You try to make it whole again. I guess I thought the same could be true for a person. They sat in a comfortable silence, the sounds of the kitchen winding down around them. Eleanor felt a sense of peace she had long thought was lost to her forever. She had come to Abuela's kitchen seeking to conquer, to acquire, to possess. And instead she had been given a gift, the chance to see the world, and herself, in a completely new light. So I'll ask you again. What is a person worth? The story of Eleanor and Maya reminds us that true value isn't worn on a sleeve or displayed in a bank account. It's hidden in plain sight. It's in the quiet dignity of the person who does the work no one notices. It's in the character they show when they think no one is watching. Every person you meet today is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and holds a potential you cannot see. The next time you're tempted to dismiss someone, to roll your eyes, to see a uniform instead of a soul, remember this story. Remember that a moment of kindness can change a life, and a moment of contempt can cost you more than you could ever imagine. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with a time you realize you misjudged someone. Let's remind each other that the most valuable investment we can ever make is in seeing the profound, immeasurable worth in every single person we meet.